Guys, I think we've lost the plot a little bit. Instagram and TikTok nowadays are so full of tropes and themes and ideas and hooks and aesthetics and first and last line ideas and lots of tiny little things that, yes, ultimately do make up the contents of books, but at the same time are just not the things that we should be focusing on in order to finish writing first drafts. And although it is amazing that there is such a big space online for writing and books and inspiration, and I'm absolutely not bashing that in any way at all, but I think the internet is just so saturated with other people's advice that sometimes we kind of forget what we actually want to do and what we actually should be doing. This video isn't really advice. This video is more the bare bones of how to actually write a book in this day and age where our minds are so distracted and the internet is so full of stuff that is drawing us away from what we actually want to be doing. Maybe you've never written a book before, maybe this is your 100th book that you're writing as you're finding this video. Maybe you're about to agree with everything I say, maybe you're going to completely disagree. But I really want to just outline the most important aspects of writing a book and just taking it back to the bare minimum, stripping it back, right back to the basics of what we should be doing. Because I think we got a little bit lost along the way. First up, to write a book, you need a plot. You need characters and you need a setting, and ultimately that's kind of it. Or that's not it, but those are the non-negotiables, because if you don't have that, you don't really have a story. And here's the thing, I think these three big things really do work hand in hand, because you can't have a plot without having somewhere where the plot takes place, and you can't have a plot without the characters driving it. But you know, you can't have characters meaninglessly sort of floating in the void without somewhere to put them, and you also can't have a story without these characters having something to do and something driving them. And if you just have this kind of concept of a world, that's definitely not a story, because nothing is happening and there's nothing in it. So these are definitely the absolute bare bones, bare minimum of what you need in order to start crafting your story. Now, if we're talking about first drafts, characters don't need to be fully fleshed out. The plot can be weak, there can be plot holes, the world building could be awful. If this is just your first draft, it's not going to be good. And I've recorded a whole video about why your first draft doesn't need to be perfect. And basically, in summary, your first draft is just facilitating getting the next drafts done. Your first draft is just getting the idea onto the page. The first draft is just kind of getting the plot and the characters and the world building out of your head and onto the paper so that you can edit and revise and make it into an amazing story. And that is why those three things don't need to be incredible to start off with, but they do need to be present. We can flesh them out later on, that's not a problem. And then as we are fleshing out, the next things to be thinking about are kind of themes and tropes and subplots and really just genre specific details. And this is where we can kind of start to bring in all of those ideas you see floating online. Pause. I don't mean like stealing other people's ideas. I just mean a lot of what we see on TikTok and Instagram at the moment. I'm going to use tropes as an example. Tropes comes up a lot because it's things that you can include in your book to make it, you know, more marketable or to make it fit a certain idea that you have of this book. And it's things like this that really start to flesh out the book and make it more than just 2D, if that makes sense. It's things like this that ultimately would, you know, capture other people's attention and bring in a certain market audience. And even if you're not thinking about that yet, even if you're not publishing this book, it's kind of a way to think about what you really like to see in books. That's sort of the start of things that you'd want to bring in. But this is exactly what I mean when I say, like, these sort of things shouldn't be driving your book necessarily. It's okay if your initial idea does come from like, oh, I want this specific first line, I want this specific last line, I want this piece of dialogue to be somewhere in the middle, I want it to have this trope. It's okay to think about that to start with. It's okay if your book, you know, kind of stems from this sort of idea. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that there's one exact formula of how to write a book and you have to stick to it. I'm just saying in terms of getting like a plausible fiction story, it needs those plot, characters and setting. And it's okay to think about other things too, but those are the bare bones, and everything else is kind of like an additional extra into what makes that book unique and what makes that book stand out and what makes that book your book and what makes it unique to you and what makes you love it. And once again, placing emphasis on this is why your first draft is not your final draft. This is why your first draft should be messy. It shouldn't be perfect, because revisions and editing exist for a reason. If you want to just write a book, yeah, you can write a first draft. But if you want to write a good book, you're gonna need more than just one draft. And maybe some people disagree with me. Maybe some people are gonna come in and say, oh, but XYZ author wrote this book and the first draft was the one that he sent off to agents. You know, but I've never heard of that happening, and quite frankly, the more you edit and revise your book, the better it's going to be. I think I definitely had this sort of misconception when I was a lot younger. You know, I've been writing for a very, very long time now. I started writing my first stories when I was honestly about 5 years old, and then when I got to the age of about, I want to say 13-ish, that's when I kind of realized, oh, I could make this into something bigger. I could start writing actual books. And I think when I was writing that very first book, I kind of thought, right, I'm just gonna write it, and then when I've written it, it's done. And obviously at that point, I just didn't really know anything about kind of the writing and editing process. And obviously that book was god awful, and not just because I was 13, but because I didn't even like go back and edit it. I was kind of editing as I went along, which I absolutely never do now in my first drafts, because I think it's a really bad habit, and I think it just slows progress ultimately. But if you are completely new to the kind of writing and editing process, I want to tell you now that your first draft is not going to be your final book. And I want to try and get that out of your head kind of as soon as possible, because although it might be scary, although it might be daunting, you're thinking, wait, so I have to write my book and then I have to rewrite it and edit it and edit it. So actually writing a book does not take like a couple of months and then it's done. Yeah, I'm really sorry to kind of burst that bubble. But someone had to do it. And I think another one of the kind of discussions that are commonly had with people who are newer to writing is the kind of planner versus pantser debate. And also, I'm aware that this is not just people who are new to writing, this is ongoing, this is people who have been doing it for ages too. But I actually had a DM recently which got me thinking about this from someone on TikTok who asked, how did you go about writing your books? And I replied obviously with saying, I plan them because I'm very much a planner. I really like to outline kind of every chapter before getting into the book. And she replied being like, oh, okay, good, because I'm also a planner, and I was wondering if I was kind of maybe doing overkill. And I'd just like to say, I don't think there's such thing as overkill when it comes to planning. However, I do think there is such thing as underkill, if that makes sense. I think even people who don't plan books should at least have, I don't know, at the bare minimum in their heads, an outline of how the book is going to go. And you know, I would definitely advocate for them at least kind of writing it down, even if it's just like a middle, a beginning, and an end. It's so much more difficult to come back to projects when you haven't planned things out. Even as someone who really, really plans things, sometimes I miss out the tiniest detail that I just kept in my head and didn't put on my planning document. And then I come back to a book a month later, I'm like, what was I getting at? What was trying to occur here? So maybe you disagree with me, and I'm well aware that lots of people do, but I just think that there should be some sort of outline. There should be some sort of plan before you can really get into your book. And I think that kind of debate leads me nicely onto thinking about kind of what I mentioned at the beginning, and that is that there's just so much advice on the internet. There are so many hints and tricks and tips, and especially for people just starting out, I think it can get very overwhelming and you can start to listen to people too much. And I think I say this in almost every single writing tip or writing video that I make, and that is that you have got to stop listening to other people's advice. And if that means that you have to put this video down and stop watching this because you think you're listening to me too much, that is absolutely fine. Stop the video, put it down, and stop listening to me. Because I think ultimately one of the biggest blockers for writing books is you get in your head too much, you start doubting too much, imposter syndrome. Listening to other people too much is making you think you're doing something wrong. But ultimately, if you're just writing your book, you're not doing anything wrong. There is not one way to write a book. So I think that's kind of a nice way for me to sort of summarize this video and end off this video, is by saying, yes, I might have sat here and told you kind of how to go through the process of writing a book and like the bare minimum things that we should be thinking about. But ultimately, if Watching videos like this is hindering your process. You should not be watching them. I think I've been writing for so long that I know which advice to kind of block out and which ones to focus on. I know to unfollow accounts that make me unproductive and make me overthink what I'm doing. And I no longer have those kind of negative things in my space that hinder me or sort of drain my energy or make me doubt myself. But if you can take one piece of advice from this video, I would say it's this. If you're not sure whether you should be listening to someone's advice or not, I think the answer is normally stop listening. Even though I tried to make this video kind of as factual as possible, ultimately, lots of things on the internet are just people's opinions. And yes, a lot of those may be based on fact. Yes, people may have education. Yes, people might have studied it for their whole life. But there is always just no stopping people's personal opinions and preference from getting out into the things that they say and they do and post on the internet. As I'm recording this, we're literally just into 2026, and I think it's so important in the new year when we've got all these resolutions about kind of cleansing our energy, cleansing negative things from our life, cleansing the things that are stopping us from doing what we want to do and being what we want to be. It's so important to stop consuming media that's making you doubt yourself and stop consuming media that's making you doubt your process. If anything, I would say writing inspiration and tips and advice should be more aimed at people who've been doing it for a long time in case there's anything new that they pick up from it. If you're more of a new writer, I would honestly say avoid the internet at all costs. Avoid other people's opinions and other people's advice because it is going to be a massive hindrance. And that is not what I want for you. I think writing should be a fun and enjoyable process, and especially as you're just starting out, you shouldn't be overcomplicating it. That is going to be all for today's video. I hope you guys learned something or kind of grounded yourself or reminded yourself of something today in this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.